I know a lot of guys who were brought over here when they were children from Mexico, and some of them don't even speak Spanish anymore. They don't even know anybody in Mexico. They don't have any family over there, and at different periods, and even now, some of them are under threat of of having to go back. And it's mind-boggling because they don't even speak Spanish or know anyone over there. It'd be like you and me being sent over to Czechoslovakia or something. I just don't know anyone. I don't speak the language. That would be crazy. And all because of something that I didn't even do. I was brought over here by adults, and I feel for those people a lot. So, and again, I also know of people who came here illegally who haven't lived such great lives. And I have stories about that too. But this is the people close to me. This is my background in this. And so it's an issue that really touches my heart.
Welcome to the Radically Christian Bible Study Podcast. I'm your host, Wes McAdams. Here we have one goal: learn to love like Jesus. Today we're continuing our series on Christians and culture by talking to my friend Marco Arroyo about the topic of immigration. How should Christians love our immigrant neighbors? How should we love our neighbors with whom we disagree politically? We'll get to that conversation in just a moment, but before we do, I want to encourage you to check out VidAngel. It's a service that helps you filter objectionable content out of your movies and television shows. I use it with Netflix and Amazon Prime videos all the time. It makes it so that I can actually enjoy these shows with and without my kids. So if you're interested in a free trial, go to radicallychristian.com/vidangel. It's radicallychristian.com/vidangel, or you can use the code radically when you sign up on VidAngel's website. Okay, now my conversation with Marco Arroyo. Marco Arroyo, welcome back to the podcast, brother.
I am honored to be back. I loved it last time, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome this time again.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to have you. I'm used to looking at you on a screen because I watch your YouTube channel all the time, and I appreciate what you do there. So for those that may not have heard our last conversation or may not be aware of your work, why don't you tell us a little bit about your local work with the church, but also your online stuff?
Yeah, I'm the preaching minister here at the Sigerville Church of Christ in Southeast Dallas County, and I've been here for about 4 years now and love it here so much. I love the people here. It's awesome. And I also do an online ministry called In Between Sundays, my YouTube channel. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts now. I finally did that like a month ago. But I basically on In Between Sundays, I do like cultural commentary, reacting to religious discussions that happen, debates that happen, things like that, and some kind of one-off videos that are kind of topical, a little bit of everything. Done some podcasts with people recently that I really love, just dialogue conversations. So a little bit of a lot of stuff. And so there's either something for everyone or just a lot to hate.
I can't imagine anybody hating what you do because you do it with such a great attitude, and I appreciate the tone with which you tackle it. You have the tendency to have a thumbnail that of course is provocative in some way, as you have to do on YouTube, and so I'll click it kind of grimacing and wondering, okay, I wonder which direction, but you always handle it so well, and regardless of the topic, I appreciate your thoughts, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you back, but especially because you said cultural commentary. That's what we're really talking about in this series right now, is Christians and culture, and how we navigate the current culture, whatever culture that might be, and some of the issues that come up, the unique things that we deal with. And one of the topics that you suggested that we discuss, and one that I've been thinking about a lot, but I'm certainly not an expert on this subject, but it is one that is affecting the church right now, and that's immigration. I think that there are some Christians that are really happy about what's happening with immigration changes right now. I think there are Christians that are really angry and upset about it. Then there are other Christians that are terrified, that are afraid that they're going to get caught up in what is happening right now. And I kind of, even before I throw it to you, I kind of want to give a little bit of context for people that may not be aware of sort of the big picture of what's happening right now. Of course, there are those that are in the country illegally that came to the United States of America illegally. They knew they were breaking the rules when they came here, and they are being caught up and deported. But there's also a lot of people whose immigration status has changed, and they are being caught up in that as well. They came here legally, and then their status has been changed, and now they're being deported. This is from an April 8th. We're recording this April 24th. So April 8th article from Fox News. And it's talking about the CBP app. And it says that this was used by nearly 1 million migrants to schedule appointments at official ports of entry before they were paroled into the U.S. The migrants were permitted to seek asylum and given temporary work authorization for 2 years while they waited for the outcomes of their respective proceedings. So in other words, these are people that came to the United States seeking refuge. They were refugees, and they were given official permission to come into the country. They were given 2 years to work and to wait for their hearing to see whether or not they could stay. And it says that Trump ended the use of the CBP One app to parole migrants on his first day in office. His administration has also paused applications for parole programs and allowed ICE to cancel parole statuses of migrants. The Trump administration has now begun notifying migrants who use the app, telling them that their legal status has been revoked. The message that they received was, if you don't depart the United States immediately, you'll be subject to potential law enforcement actions that will result in your removal from the United States unless you have otherwise obtained a lawful basis to remain here. DHS is terminating your parole. Do not attempt to remain in the United States. The federal government will find you. Please depart the United States immediately. So there's kind of there's a broad spectrum of what we're talking about when we talk about immigration and what's happening right now currently and how we feel about it and how we navigate it. But Marco, you have a unique perspective because of who you are and your background and your family. So if you don't mind, kind of share with us your background and how that shapes how you think about this subject.
Yeah, first and foremost, I really appreciate you pointing out how broad it is because it is absolutely that. It is not a one. Immigration is like in terms of immigrants, they're not a monolith in even their circumstances at all, even remotely. And just to give you a few examples from my own life, yeah, I'm from a Mexican family on both sides. Grew up in Los Angeles, California. Immigrant families everywhere. Now, my mom's side has been in America for 2 or 3 generations now. My great grandfather, I found out, I think he was the first born in America on my mom's side. He actually fought in World War II. Um, but on my dad's side, my dad was the first member of our family born here. My grandmother was 6 months pregnant with my dad. She was 16. My grandfather was 18 or 19 or so when they came over from Mexico. Just two young people in love, seeking the American dream. They had a couple of family members that had already come over here and started businesses, and so they wanted to make a great life for their family. So they came over here, and so they did. They worked their way up. They got amnesty by Reagan in the 80s, my grandparents did, and they started a business, raised some kids, ended up becoming legal citizens not that long ago. My grandfather's in his 70s, and I can't publicly tell you how old my grandmother is. She'd disown me, but she's very, very young. She would want everyone to know. But my in-laws, also, very close with my in-laws, and they're both immigrants, and they were brought here as children, and now are both citizens after money, hard work, lawyers, and stuff to accomplish that. And my father-in-law's family, and I'm sharing this detail in particular for part of our discussion. I think it's really helpful. My father-in-law's family, were escaping the brutal civil war in El Salvador, that happened, in the 80s, that brought about the kidnapping of a lot of kids the age of my father-in-law at that time by the Salvadorian army. They oversaw the kidnapping of a lot of thousands of children. They would yank them sometimes out of their parents' arms, abused in various ways, forcibly adopted, sold to people, trafficked to other countries. I mean, and not just kidnappings, but if you look into that civil war, there were massacres that happened during that time. Up to 1,000 people in a day in one small town were just massacred by them. And so there were lots of human rights abuses. Over 1 million people were displaced. An estimated like 500,000 left the country. Like 25% of the population at the time. And again, the reason why I go into details is because it's kind of ironic that the United States was the primary financial backer of the Salvadorian army at that time, and that was where my father-in-law, where his dad and his brother, when they came over, they came to the United States, to that very country that was kind of, holding the pocketbook for them, and it kinda brings up an interesting question of, how ought a country to proceed policy-wise when a portion of their immigration problems are caused by them financing the atrocities that caused the people to leave in the first place, and, so that part of it is very emotional for our family, and, my father-in-law became a Christian not too long after arriving here, became a preacher, has had a wonderful ministry for a long time. My mother-in-law from Mexico, brought over here, when she was about 14 years old and, um, got married, had kids, got legal status, is now a citizen. And one more quick example, I have a childhood friend, and there's a million of these, but these are just some of the people that are very close to me, who was brought over here when he was 7 from Mexico. I know a lot of guys who were brought over here when they were children from Mexico, and, some of them don't even speak Spanish anymore. They don't even know anybody in Mexico, they don't have any family over there, and at different periods and even now, some of them are under threat of of having to go back, and it's mind-boggling because they don't even speak Spanish or know anyone over there. It'd be like you and me being sent over to Czechoslovakia or something. I just don't know anyone. I don't speak the language. That would be crazy, and all because of something that I didn't even do. I was brought over here by adults, and I feel for those people a lot. So, and again, I also know of people who came here illegally who haven't lived such great lives. And I have stories about that too. But this is the people close to me. This is my background in this, and so it's an issue that really touches my heart and makes it more than just an X's and O's, dollars and cents issue, but it's real lives, real families, real pain, hopes, and dreams. So it's deeply personal. And again, and when I just think about the people in my life, it points out that it's not a very simple issue at all, and definitely not monolithic in its nature.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to point out that whatever cultural issue that we're dealing with, it's almost wrong to frame it as an issue because it's people and yes, there are policies and yes, there are both like immigration policies and as you pointed out, foreign policy, like how does the nation interact with other nations and the sovereignty of nations, all of these things, but there are real people that get caught up in this and our brothers and sisters. So we could talk about this on the level of neighbor and like what is our obligation to and our responsibility to, and how do we love our neighbor? We could talk about it on the level of what should the government do or what should our pleading with the government be, but also our brothers and sisters. And we have brothers and sisters around the world that our brothers and sisters we belong to a family that is multi-ethnic, that is multilingual. And so caring about people and what does that look like and what's the best way to care for people, that's what this conversation is all about. I appreciate you sharing your background and how that shapes your own perspective and how it helps you keep things in perspective.
Yeah, yeah, families are even individual families are not very simple, and when you think about, like, the broader American culture or just particularly within the church and who Christians are called to love, it's not very simple. It's not like one kind of person. It's a lot of different things you've gotta weigh against one another and try to figure out where your efforts are best placed.
Yeah. Well, and that gets to the next question and the next thought, and this is something you brought up on your show, on your podcast, and that's the idea that the vice president brought up not too long ago. It's this idea of ordered loves or ordo amoris, and it's a Latin idea. It goes way back theologically and within Christian tradition, but I've heard this used to sort of, justify or, legitimize the idea of, America first kind of a perspective, but it also sounds very reasonable when you talk about it, ordering your loves and that we should care about certain people more than other people. We often hear sort of the example used of family, like I have a responsibility to care for my kids more than I do just kids in general. There are a lot of kids in the world. There's a lot of kids in my neighborhood, but I have a specific responsibility to my children. And then that idea sort of gets carried on and says, okay, well, if that's true, then I have a more responsibility to, and that idea. But I hear Christians, I've heard Christians over the last few months really arguing about this ordo amoris idea and about the ordered love. So if you would, kind of explain what that is, and is it rooted in scripture? Is it something that we should practice?
Yeah, yeah. The idea is that like love must be rightly ordered in terms of not just your heart's affection, but also in how we apply that. And obviously, Augustine popularized this in the end of the fourth century. But it's the idea that with God as the supreme object of my love, followed by people and things in their proper place. But in that category, people is also a very big category too. Where do I put people? Which people? And so it's about, and this is so important to understand, this is about achieving the highest good with my love, which is to say, I'm aligning my heart with God's will for where my heart is supposed to be and how I apply what is within my heart. And so we're called to love God, love our fellow man, but we need to be discerning about where and how to apply that love yeah, so God gets it first, then who's next? Now, I love that concept a lot. There's a lot of scripture that we can talk about that lays that out, that God gets our love first, second greatest commandment, or do good unto all, especially of the household of faith, like in Galatians 6. Or even Jesus points this out, like when he says, "Whoever loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." There you have to order your loves, and uh, now, when J.D. Vance said this, though, I kind of have to separate the biblical concept of it with what J.D. Vance said because, in applying it to the immigration conversation, he kind of goes like, before we prioritize the needs of immigrants, American citizens or America has to kind of be in tip-top shape, and then we can concern ourselves with with them, and just in the nature of JD Vance's role, I don't even fault him really harshly for it, but just in the nature of his role, he has to put America before Christian doctrine. He has to, and so it's not surprising that he does that. To be a politician at that level, you just have to be more true to policy than you are to doctrinal truths. And I think even most Christians who vote for voted for Trump or JD Vance would probably agree with that too. Like we get it, they have to play the game to win a general election. They're not going to be completely true to doctrine in order to win that. And so, yeah, I the way I kind of quickly explain ordo amoris is kind of what my experience was recently. My daughter was hospitalized 2 times in the last couple months, and I had to triage my life, and I like the word triaging as a way to understand it in my own mind, which is when she was in the hospital, I dropped everything. And of course, I didn't preach here at Seagaville. I didn't teach any Bible classes. I didn't go on any visits. I didn't do anything like that. I believe there's a preacher's meeting. I didn't attend the preacher's meeting. And not only that, we have an older daughter. She's 2, and didn't take her out for ice cream that week or go on a date with my wife, which I try to do every single week. And did I fail to love anyone in that scenario? Well, no, of course not. I ordered my love and my application of it and put it in the right places. And now, if by saying all, if I didn't have the greatest grandparents on planet Earth, if my daughter didn't have the greatest grandparents on planet Earth to watch her all week long, then I would have had to reorder my loves then, and maybe I stay with my daughter at home and split time with my wife or something like that. That's kind of the concept. I've got to order these things the right way. There's push and pull, there's tension, never regarding to whether or not I have love, but how I can best apply my love. And that is not the same as what JD Vance meant by ordering your love. It's just not. It was much more in an America logistics, X's and O's context, and not really like how can we best show love to everyone that is here right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, I'd love to read from Augustine or Augustine. This is from on Christian Doctrine, Book 1, Chapter 28. If anybody wants to look it up, but he says this, and I think this is really helpful to because I really didn't know anything about Ordo Amoris. I may have heard that concept, but I've heard it more in how it's used rather than, well, what was Augustine really talking about in context? And he says further, all men are to be loved equally, and that's kind of what we're saying. What you're saying is that it's not about necessarily how you feel about people, because we feel love towards everyone, we feel affection towards everyone, but that charity can't be expressed in the same way towards everyone, nor should it be. He says, but since you cannot do good to all, you are to pay special regard to those who, by the accidents of time or place or circumstances, are brought into closer connection with you. And I think that there's an interesting concept there, is that he says by accidents of time or place or circumstance. So where I see people misapplying this idea of ordo amoris is that the person who's right in front of me, because by the accidents of time or place or circumstance, they just happen to be right in front of me. They have a special bearing on me right then because they're right in front of me, even if they don't otherwise have any claim on my possessions or my whatever. And I think that sometimes we might misorder our loves if we say something like, I love your example of, if I have a child that is in need, my child takes precedent, takes priority over other responsibilities that I have even. But not so if I have a child that's just fine. I mean, my 2 kids right now, they're at my house, and as far as I know, they're great. They're wonderful. They're having a great day. They're comfortable. They have everything that they need. They're not sick. I don't need to rush and help them. And so if I see someone, even if he's a stranger, if I see a stranger that's lying outside my window and he's hurt, he takes precedent and priority over my children because he has a need right now that I can meet. I can't just sit here and say, well, you know what? My kids need me, and in my belongings and my time, it belongs to my kids, and I prioritize them above this person. And so it's like the Good Samaritan story, that here's a Samaritan and a Jew. They are a different ethnicity, and even other Jewish people are walking past him, but this Samaritan man sees him and knows, this is my neighbor. Why? Because he's right here in front of me and he needs my love and he needs my help. And so Augustine is saying that the person who's right there in front of you needs to be prioritized over the person who's not there, who's just theoretically in need. And he talks about the idea that if you have 2 people and they have the same need and the same relationship to you as each other, you're going to have to decide, do I help this person or do I help that person? And how do you sort of make that decision? He says, since you cannot consult for the good of them all, you must take the matter as decided for you by a sort of lot, according as each man happens for the time being to be more closely connected with you. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge, that if there's somebody who's in our neighborhood or in our community or right in front of us, that person takes precedent right then. And sometimes when it comes to these conversations about policies and politics and culture and ideas, we can talk about people in theory. And it's one thing to love people theoretically or to sort of virtue signal online about what we think about this, that, or the other. But what Jesus is calling us to is to love the people that we have the greatest responsibility to. And yes, that's our family. And yes, that's the people we have an obligation to, but it's also the people that are right in front of us. And sometimes that might be someone who is an undocumented worker. It might be somebody whose legal status in the country has suddenly changed. That person might be right in front of you to love and take care of. But if we have this sort of, I would say, disordered love that says, well, but you're not of my ethnicity, or you're not of my country, you're not one of my countrymen. And that's how I sometimes hear this idea being applied, is almost in an ethnocentric way, or even sometimes a xenophobic or racist way, where somebody says, well, I have a greater obligation to people who look like me or talk like me or come from my country. And that's not at all, I don't think, what Augustine had in mind.
Yeah, that word is so important. The concept of opportunity is so important to this discussion, that sometimes situations or people fall into your lap, and that's where you have a responsibility as a Christian. Like the parable of the Good Samaritan, the the other people didn't walk by because by helping that man they were going to be violating their obligation to their loved ones. They walked by because they didn't really love him, and that's the whole point here. You didn't love your neighbor. It's not because by loving this guy you were going to fail to love the primary people in your life or fail to take care of them. They had a lack of love. And So when the opportunity presents itself, yeah, when the opportunity presents itself, what is a decision you're going to make? What is the mindset you're going to have? And I think when we think about issues like this, the question should be like, does my view on this or do my actions on this help achieve the highest good for God's will in this moment, in this opportunity? A lot of the times we look at things in terms of like what our ideal scenario is, but it's not the ideal scenario in the Good Samaritan parable, or it's not the ideal scenario when you're a follower of Christ and a Roman soldier tells you, carry my bag for a mile. It's not the ideal scenario, but what can you do that helps achieve the highest good for God's will in that moment when that opportunity? It's so amazing how something as inconvenient as carrying the soldier's bag for a mile, um, it just falls into your lap, and Jesus says, "That's such a great opportunity. That's such a great opportunity for you, and you've gotta see it that way." Not in terms of, like, the difficulty, the logistics, or what is taking you away from other stuff that you care about. That's a great opportunity to show my love to people, and so, in terms of how a Christian not to order their life, opportunity is such a major part of this.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you pointed that out about, that we're doing this for to accomplish the will of God, for the glory of God. In fact, that's Augustine's primary point, I think, is that disordered love leads to idolatry. If you misorder your love, if you order the love of things or people in a way that they take priority over God, or that you love them for their own sake. His argument is that we should love man. He says every man is to be loved as a man for God's sake, but God is to be loved for his own sake. So the whole idea is that if I just love things because I love those things, or I even love people just because I love those people, I just enjoy those people. I enjoy these kinds of people more than I enjoy these kinds of people. I love these people more than those kinds of people. That becomes idolatry. It becomes something sick and twisted. But when we love people for God's sake, then we love the people, like you said, the people that are right in front of us, no matter where they come from or what they look like. We love them because God put them in our path. Augustine goes on to say, as Jesus does, that we even love our enemies. Why? Because we want our enemies to love the God that we love. And so we are loving them for the sake of God, towards God, to help them in their path to God, which means that our ordering our love correctly should never look like hatred towards anybody. It's simply a matter of recognizing that I have a greater obligation sometimes to some people than I do to other people, but I have an obligation to love everyone that I have the opportunity and the means to love.
Yes, and I know we're both agreed on the fact that, like, we wanna give definitely I think the people that would disagree with this, I wouldn't say that they're not loving, but I think that sometimes we just, because of all the noise that's out there, can just have a disordered love, and, that doesn't mean you have no love, it just means I'm trying to figure out how to temper this and put it in the right place and help it take form. My, intention and heart is there, but sometimes the way we apply that, gets messed up, and, if I just want people to understand that, like, for a Christian, and this is the basic point, for a Christian, it is not which course of action in this situation is best for the prosperity of this nation, as much as it is which course of action will best reflect my love for God and for him to get glory. And I get it, like, we both love America, and, um, I enjoy this country a lot, and I was on the phone with my grandfather this week, and I told him, "I'm so thankful that you guys came over here," and I don't thank him for that enough. I love it very much. I like to go visit Mexico, but I love to live here, and, however, though, when I consider what are my highest values, I don't go, "Well, what's best for America?" I think, not what does America want, but what does the Almighty want? What does God care about the most? And so therefore, that's gonna be what I care about the most, regardless of whatever kind of chain reaction consequences that may bring about to something that is so secondary, like an earthly nation, unlike many others before it, in the sense that they're here for a while, then they'll pass away, but we're part of a greater nation, an everlasting kingdom, and so that's gotta be my top priority all the time. And I don't think that should be very controversial.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's Augustine's whole point is that we love people, and I think he doesn't really talk about this, but we would love a nation for the sake of God, for God's glory, you know. So it's about how can we use this opportunity and this place and this situation to the glory of God and to help people to come to know Him, and I think sometimes we get those ideas mixed up, and that's what this whole conversation is about, and I think that it's where iron can sharpen iron. Like you said, even if somebody might disagree to some extent, I think it's good for us to have these conversations. I was thinking about the idea, maybe even like the rich man and Lazarus parable or story for those who don't think that it's parable, but this story is of this rich man who's living in a house where he has everything that he wants. He has all the food that he could possibly need or want, and there's a man lying at his gate every day that wants just the crumbs from his table. Now, Jesus doesn't say whether the rich man has a family, but I would assume that he does. But even if he is prioritizing, you could say, well, the rich man is prioritizing his family. He's seeking his family's well-being and not Lazarus's well-being. And so he's rightly ordering his family's needs above Lazarus's needs. There comes a point, though, where we are prioritizing our family's comfort and luxury above the needs of our neighbor, and that's where our love becomes disordered. I could very easily say, "Well, listen, I can't help these people or those people or even this specific person because I have to take care of my kids." Okay, great. Are your kids hungry? No, they're very well fed. They have everything that they need, but we could hoard this wealth or we could hoard these resources over here and justify that in our mind. I think we have to be really careful that we're not doing that, that we're not saying my comforts, my wants, my desires, my luxuries are more important than the actual needs of my hungry neighbor. That's what Jesus is admonishing in that story, is the fact that here's a person who's prioritizing his own comfort over the well-being of his neighbor.
Yeah, and I think this could be more easily appreciated if we made the comparison less controversial or hot button. Like, for example, if there were someone in the church that said, I'm going to stop giving in the contribution this year because my family and we're going to go on a month-long trip to Cabo San Lucas in Mexico, and I love my family so much. I'm ordering my loves, and I know that the church here is in great need, and we're told that to give, but at the same time, whoever doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. And so therefore, I mean, I don't know how you could tell me that's wrong, right? I mean, we wanna go to Cabo and, those catamarans are pretty pricey, so all our year's contribution is gonna go to that vacation, and we would say, "Hey, maybe you don't need the month in Cabo. Maybe you could take 2 weeks. Just take 2 weeks," which is a lot for a lot of people. Maybe do a little bit less than that, and that way you can still have your loves ordered. Vacation is good. I love going on trips with my wife and my daughters, but we would say, "Hey, I think you're prioritizing, as you said, like, your luxury over the opportunities to help in places that really matter to God more than 2 extra weeks in Cabo," you know?
Yeah, and the other side of that is that if somebody said, "I'm not gonna put money in the plate this year because my child is in the hospital getting cancer treatments, and we can't afford her treatments, much less to contribute to the," I would say, absolutely, you have to prioritize the needs of your daughter that's sick and dying over the needs of the greater congregation. And so, yeah, we do have to sort of work through all of these things in our mind and say, am I taking care of my primary responsibilities first? And then as I have the opportunity and the means, am I helping my neighbors that are around me?
Mhm, yeah, and that is no one would look at that situation and go, "Do you even love God? Do you love God?" Everyone would see that as completely reasonable. Absolutely.
So let's talk about this idea of the nation, and you sort of brought this up, and I'm glad that you did, and how the leaders of a particular nation, this country or any other country, have different priorities, and I don't expect I'm not a Christian nationalist. I don't expect a nation to be baptized. I don't expect a nation to be Christian, to be the representative of God on earth. I think that the church is called to be the people of God, this multi-ethnic, multinational, multilingual people all over the world. But I do think that Christians have an obligation to encourage, admonish, cry out for justice in whatever nation they're in. And so some people, I think, would look at situations like this one with immigration and say, listen, hey, the church is the church does church stuff, the nation does the nation stuff, let the nation do what the nation's going to do. Other people are saying, no, 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 we need to make the nation Christian and we need to make the nation reflect Christian values. And other people would sort of take a middle ground and say, yeah, yeah, the church does church stuff and the nation does nation stuff, but the church has a responsibility to encourage and cry out for justice and say, hey, this is wrong. You need to do what is right. You're doing what is unjust to our neighbors. So, how do you think about that balance of how we navigate, some of those things and this issue in particular?
You know, when I first started hearing about Christian nationalism, I thought I had a handle on what it was. And then the more I hear people talk about Christian nationalism that espouse it, I feel like it's like this unpunchable monster that, like, every time you think you got it, it's actually not that. And then you go, oh, so it's this other thing? Okay. And then you think you got that, and they go, well, that's not what it is either. I feel like there's like a moving of the goalpost in what Christian nationalism is. It's pretty frustrating. And then I started to read Wolf's book. And then I went, "Oh, I hope that's not Christian nationalism." That's maybe the worst one of the worst iterations of it I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree.
But I don't know if that's been your experience too, but I feel like no one tells you what Christian nationalism is, or at least no one agrees on what it really is. I don't know if you are fully in agreement with this, but here's where I'm at in terms of my relationship with the nation and things like that. I believe anywhere I can further God's glory, I do it. When I think that I can do that in the ballot box, I do it. When I think that I can do that on the jujitsu mats, I like Brazilian jiu-jitsu a lot. I do that. Social media, my YouTube channel. I do worry though. I really worry that Christians put way too much stock in government or country as a vehicle for change, for moral good, when that's really supposed to be the church that Jesus built as the ultimate vehicle for change. The church is meant to, as I said earlier, outlast every single government because it is inherently superior and it always will be superior, not even close. And I have concerns that our heavy, heavy focus in our nation's role for change is a sign of like a real abandoned role of ministry, Christian ministry. And yeah, like, for example, people say sometimes, wouldn't it be awesome if in America we can recapture the morality that we've lost? And I go, "Yeah, I would love whatever morality we've lost, I'd love to recapture that. Absolutely." And then they go, "Well, that's why we need Trump." And I go, "Ugh." It deflates me. It deflates it's one of the most discouraging thoughts to hear a Christian say, "Well, that's why we need Joe Biden. That's why we need Kamala Harris. That's why we need Trump. That's why we need whoever." That's where you lose me. That's such a deflating thing. We look sometimes at evil people doing evil things, and like the more Christian nationalist kind of crowd says, like, well, these things, they're doing evil things more and more, and it's becoming increasingly systemic. So if someone's going to impose, let's make it us. Shouldn't it be us? Wouldn't you rather us be? And it's kind of like what I hear is like, if someone's going to be the bad guy, let's at least us be the bad guy because we'll be a good version of the bad guy or something like that. And I'm sympathetic to the idea that if someone's gonna impose, we would prefer it to be our friends, but at the same by the same token, I can't sign on to it because it will always be a brutally cheap replacement of what should create real change, internal change, and not external, uh, action. Politics as a force for change, or the country or the nation, to me is an ant, is a speck in comparison to what true change really is in Christ. It's almost it's like nothing in my mind. I don't know if I take that too far for you or for other people or not, but, um, I don't know, maybe a
No,
little off
eh,
base on that.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think we're on the same page. I often think about what Christians in Rome, or in the first century would think about the way that we think about politics and the way that we think about things. And it's different, it's very different. They didn't live in a democratic republic. They didn't live in this kind of a political environment. They didn't have as much say. Nobody was asking the Christians, "What do you think on this topic? How would you like things to be run?" And so they didn't have those options, but they certainly didn't put their faith and trust in the Roman Empire. They didn't think that the Roman Empire was going to bring about the kingdom of God. They didn't think that it was the kingdom of God. They didn't think that it was a city built on a hill. They didn't think that Rome was called to be salt and light. They just didn't entrust the Roman Empire with that kind of responsibility. They believed that the Roman Empire had a responsibility from God to punish evildoers. And so I think about that a lot. I think about myself. I try to think of myself as a missionary, as an immigrant, as a foreigner, as an exile, as a sojourner in whatever country I happen to be in. And I choose, like you, I choose the United States. There's so many things about this place that I love, and I could live in other places, but I choose to live here as a missionary for Jesus and to represent him and his kingdom. And I do recognize that my priorities as a representative of the kingdom of God are different than the priorities of worldly kingdoms and worldly nations and worldly empires. And there's a certain extent to which I think, they've got to do what they've got to do, and I've got to do what I've got to do. I've got to do what Jesus calls me to do, and they have to do what they're called by their constituents or by, whatever to do. And so I look at borders and I think, okay, you're going to have to decide, do we have open borders? Do we have closed borders? Do we build walls? Who do we let in? How do we let them in? But sometimes there comes a point at which the government, the nations are doing what is objectively unloving, unkind, inhumane. And I'm not saying necessarily that that's happening now here, but we all recognize that. We all look around the world and we see, Nazi Germany, or we see the Soviet Union, or we see these kinds of historical examples or things that are happening today. And we believe that we can objectively look at that and say, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist or a Buddhist or whatever, you should be able to look at this and say, that's not the right way to treat people. That's not justice. And you need to be doing justice. And so, I think there is a point at which we can and should stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, and this probably needs to change. But to get more specific about what we're talking about with the immigration issue, it's complicated. And I don't have all the right answers. So do you think, Marco, that there's room for disagreement amongst Christians about topics like this? I mean, there are some Christians that think they have a very clear view, and maybe they do, a very clear view about what immigration policy should look like. That's true on the conservative side, on the more progressive side. But they disagree very strongly with each other, and they act like the other side inherently doesn't love their neighbor, doesn't care about their neighbor. But as we've been talking about, these issues are complicated. So can we disagree? How do we disagree? How do we work through some of this in a Christian way?
Yeah, if anyone is hearing us talk and thinking it's just appalling to think that anyone would disagree with them, I would let me just steel man the other side a little bit because it also sounds very reasonable, and it's kind of like loving your immigrant neighbor doesn't have to include like giving them a place in your physical home or having to financially support them or morally even support keeping them in this country if they're here illegally. There are the question is, are there other expressions of love that are potentially good too? And the answer is yes. Yeah, there are. It'd be crazy for us to say the only right expressions of love are the ones that we think are the right expressions of love for this situation. Situations can be so different, opportunities can be so different. And so, like, for example, I knew a guy growing up in Los Angeles who was deported like 3 times and crossed back illegally, and I remember one time he told me this crazy story. I'm running through the mountains, and the border patrol is shooting me in the back with rubber bullets, and it was so painful, those mean, evil guys, and they're just the worst people on planet Earth, and, this happened like 3 times, and well, why was he getting deported so much? This guy had a girlfriend and wouldn't stop beating her up. He would beat her up, get arrested, get deported, and then go, "These mean people here who won't let me back in so I can go over to my girlfriend," and assault her again. And so it's in that situation, it's like, no, I don't think supporting that guy being here is a good idea. Of course not. And now that's kind of a more of an extreme case. There's like the gang member kind of cases, but there are reasonable, loving, spiritual brethren who say, I just don't think that I'm not convinced that in order to best love my immigrant neighbor, I need to support their decision to pursue something that they started through illegal means. Christians who opposing immigration, they believe that they are contributing to the disrespect and disobedience to law and government, which is not a good thing. And so, therefore, by extension, God. And so, by supporting those who did something illegal, they feel like they're supporting something that God doesn't like in terms of just the disrespect of law. And I have real sympathy for that. Real sympathy for that. They'd say something like, "I don't think enabling this kind of behavior is a good thing, illegal crossing over, and I support deportations. I will try to minister to any immigrants that I know while they're here, but I just don't think love requires that they stay here." And again, it sounds very reasonable. It's not like a lot of times people, and this is like such a news thing, paint the other side like, well, they just hate you, and then the other side, well, they just hate you. And I'm not saying whether or not those people are right, but from a biblical perspective, can you really tell them that they are being objectively unloving because they're choosing a different way to love their neighbor than you? Loving your neighbor is vague for a very important reason, and it's that it can take many forms. But what is truly unacceptable is if your love takes no meaningful form at all. If there's no expression of it at all. Now we're in terms of like, this is not like agree to disagree kind of stuff. You should be loving somehow in some way. So if it takes no expression at all, that's the real problem. But differences on how to express that, that's kind of to be expected. And there can be really reasonable people on both sides who are acting in a way that's in accordance to their conscience. Maybe there's stronger and weaker brother scenarios when it comes to this stuff on both sides of it. I mean, it's way more than just black and white when it comes to how love is expressed, even in just this scenario.
Yeah. And I keep thinking about how important information is and having conversations might be to this topic. And so often I think that so many of us feel like we've got it figured out. I know what's happening because I watched this one news channel. I watch this news channel all the time, and so I get all of my information. And that's true on both ends of the political spectrum, the cultural spectrum, but it's also just true in general that we sort of live in these silos, and it's helpful to sit down and not debate or argue with somebody, but just listen to a different perspective and think, okay, well, it's not that they're right and you're wrong, or you're right and they're wrong. It's just a matter of that adds another layer to this complicated situation. And for us to exercise some humility to say, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think about people living on the Texas side of the border or the California side of the border. I also think about people that are refugees that are coming to the border to try to find refuge in the United States. But I think about how dangerous it is for people that are crossing illegally, people that are crossing the desert or crossing the river, and they're crossing illegally, and the people that are there preying on and taking advantage of people in those vulnerable situations. It's dangerous for them too. What's the best thing for them? I don't know. It's a complicated, broken situation. I don't think anybody who knows the situation would say that our immigration situation isn't broken in so many ways. How do we best love all of our neighbors of every nationality, of every ethnicity? How do we love them best? What kind of immigration policy should be in place? What kind of foreign policy should be in place? Those are way above my pay grade, but I think so often we treat people as if they're the enemy, they're the problem, who simply disagree with us, or as you said, suggest, hey, maybe a better way to love our neighbors would look like this. And we can add that information as another layer to the conversation.
Yeah, God cares so much less about you fixing this broken system over your role in loving the people involved. And I think sometimes we put our ordo moris kind of concept in the wrong place where we're thinking like, how can we fix the system? And then there's all these people that are just, regardless of what we do to the system, there's going to be people who need love. And we spend so much time and attention listening to analysis over analysis about how the system is broken, what the system needs, how to fix it, who can fix it. And there's very little thought or innovation that goes into on a mental level. How can we minister to these people? Which is again, that is putting God over the needs of this country. I It always kind of scares me when people can just talk in depth about political issues. But then when we're talking about ideas on how to minister to people, they don't really have much to say. It's a misplaced priority to say the least. And it's a scary one at that. And I hope that if anyone is hearing this and going, ooh, I can talk a lot about politics, but I don't have that much to say about ministry. I hope this is a good opportunity for them to re strategize their points of emphasis in their lives and realizing I should care way more about the true system that can actually fix everything, which is Christianity, which is following Jesus over broken systems and broken nations that will always kind of be this way. And now again, if there's a pathway that I think that can help the immigration a system through like my vote in the ballot box, I think it's a good idea for a Christian to express that. If they feel like they can do that, they should do that. But to say that that takes second place to ministry in the gospel is not even close. It's way past second. It's nowhere near that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what is so interesting. I'm so glad that you framed it that way, that sometimes these conversations about ordo amoris, and we're talking about, I need to love my American neighbors more than my immigrant neighbors or whatever. And really the order of love is who's right in front of you. Like who is that person right in front of you? It might be your family. Great. Love your family. Absolutely. But it might be your Democrat neighbor. It might be your Republican neighbor. It might be your neighbor who is consisting on a steady diet of Fox News, or a neighbor that's consisting on a steady diet of CNN. Love them, like, love them. Love your neighbor that's an American, love your neighbor that's an immigrant. Treat people like human beings, advocate that other people be treated like human beings, but have loving, civil conversations with the people in your life, whoever they may be, because God put them in your life. I was having a Bible study with a group yesterday, and we were talking about John chapter 8, and one of the things that always strikes me about the woman caught in adultery is that until the end of the story, no one talks to her. Everyone is talking about her. No one is talking to her until Jesus talks to her. Jesus speaks to her and treats her like a human being. Everybody else is treating her like a pawn in their little political game. And I feel like that's what we do with our neighbors of all kinds, of all different kinds of people. We're talking about them, not to them. And I think that's a lot of what we need to do.
Absolutely. I remember one time many years ago, I was in a men's business meeting as a younger minister, and I at the time was living like in an apartment or something, and they were discussing what to do with a parsonage. And, it was being used for a purpose, that's why I wasn't in there, and they were talking about in this meeting what to do with it, and then someone goes, "You know, we should have Marco live in there now that it's available. Marco should live there, him and Maggie," and then there's like a 5-minute discussion on where Marco should live, and I'm sitting there in the meeting like, "You guys know I'm right here, right? You guys are deciding the fate of where I'm gonna rest my head at night, where I'm gonna live, and I'm right here." And it's the weirdest experience because you're they were talking as if they could decide where I'm gonna live. And, I know for a fact, a lot of, immigrants feel that way, that, like, everyone's talking about where we're supposed to be, and we're people, we have needs and hopes and dreams and, pain, and no one's talking to us. No, we're just put in this other category, and what's even crazy is, like, my grandparents, for example, who have never broken a law in their lives, after coming into this country, and even then, back then, you can kinda just, like, get in pretty easily. Um, they're put in the same category as, like, a guy on MS-13. They're talked about as the same kind of a group, and it's just so mind-boggling. What we should do is talk to them. And it's also crazy to just chalk disagreement on this up to racism or something like that. I think the vast majority of cases, it's not really racism, but just disordered priority. There's also something to be said about the person that says, I'm just so against the sexual agenda stuff that I have to vote against, immigration and stuff like that. And um, I want people to know, like, even though our vote can't be nuanced, our own personal lives and actions can be. And I beg Christians to make sure that their expression of faith is not informed by politics, but it is informed by the heart of Jesus and his mission for the church. Or like you were saying, I hope that our perspective of each other is not informed by the news, but by the good news. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
No, that's perfectly put. And that may be where you want to end. I don't know, but if you had, I've been asking everybody, if you had to sum up everything we've sort of talked about, if you wanted to encourage Christians as you think about immigration and issues that surround immigration, what's something that you hope they would keep in mind?
Well, maybe a little bit of a quick review of this, which is look at this and every issue through the lens of spiritual opportunity, not political problems or controversy, but what is the spiritual opportunity here? If you're a Christian, you've got to think that way. I get it. I get why JD Vance doesn't think that way. He can't, kind of in the nature of his job, think that way. He can't and be effective in his job, what he's trying to do. But what I can do is say, what is the spiritual opportunity? How does my role in this give glory to Jesus? What gives me the best opportunity to love my neighbor? Again, my vote isn't nuanced, but my life can be. And so that's why, by the way, I don't fault the Christians who say I couldn't vote this time around. People go, there's so much at stake. And they go, yeah, but I just can't sign on to either party. I get it. I totally get that. People who disagree with that, I'd like to ask them the question, do you think there could ever be a circumstance where you can't stomach, or let's say both candidates are so evil, so God-hating, where you can't stomach voting for either of them? Or their agendas are so evil and bad for the will of God that you can't stomach voting for either of them? And they would all say, yeah, there could reach a point where that happens. Well, some people just got to that point quicker and their consciences were hit quicker. So with that in mind, our two-party system, we can't be nuanced, but we can love people, we can learn about people, we can get to know them. I know that this conversation becomes easier when I bring up my grandparents, my sweet grandparents. You put faces to it, it changes everything. It's kind of like, when you're a new minister in a church, you come to love those people so much more in just a few years, and you feel such an even bigger. I feel now being at Seagoville for 4 years, such a heavier burden on my heart for the people that I preach to, and a desire for them to know God. I know that it's greater than when I first got here because I can put faces to the needs and the problems, the issues, the pain, the suffering. It makes it all so different for me. It changes the tone of the whole conversation. So don't look at people through the lens of just what the debate is, what the controversy is, but look at people the way God looks at them. This is someone for whom Jesus Christ died. This is a soul and their needs. And my opportunity to love them is greater than whatever political ramifications or disputes there might be about this stuff. I've got to be I got to be mindful of that mission first before absolutely everything else. Nothing matters, even the prosperity of this country that we love. Nothing matters more than that.
Yeah. Amen. Well, that's a great place to stop. Marco, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your work in the kingdom, brother.
Oh, you too. God bless you, man.
Thank you so much for listening to the Radically Christian Bible Study Podcast. If you have just a moment, we would love for you to rate and review this podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening. It really does help more people discover this content. I also want to thank the guests who join me each week, Beth Tabor, who volunteers her time to transcribe the podcast, and our whole McDermott Road Church family who make it possible for us to provide this Bible study for you. Now, let's all go out and love like Jesus.